Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting. I would like to call the meeting to order. Dr. Albright, may I have a roll call, please?
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Here.
Peggy Mora Aragon,
Here.
Danielle Gonzalez. Here. Barbara Peterson,
Here.
Josefina Dominguez,
Here.
Courtney Jackson,
Here.
and Crystal Tapia Romero.
Here. So community members may attend APS Board of Education meetings in person at the Allison Bruce King Educational Complex at 6400 Uptown Boulevard Northeast, or watch the live stream on APS Board of Education YouTube channel. So our first item for consideration and action will be the adoption of the June 28th, 2023 Finance Committee meeting agenda and the approval of September 28th, 2022 and May 24th, 2023 Finance Committee meeting minutes. And before we do that, we will be removing items E, F, S, T, and U from the consent agenda. Are there any other items that need to be removed, members? Okay, having said that, if I could have a motion, please.
I'll move for adoption of the June 28th, 2023 Finance Committee meeting agenda with the removal of items for S, T, U, E, and F, and approval of the September 28th, 2022 and May 24th, 2023 Finance Committee meeting minutes.
You changed that S-T-U.
E and F.
F.
That's right. Is that right, Crystal?
E, F,
Okay.
S, T, U.
Okay. I didn't have you. Thank you.
Yes, may I have a second?
I'll second. Yolanda.
Thank you, Dr. Albright. If I could have a roll call.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Yes.
Peggy Mora Aragon,
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez.
No.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes. So our next item for consideration and action is consideration for approval of the June 28th, 2023 finance items on consent calendar minus items E, F, S, T, and U.
I will move for consideration of items on the Finance Committee consent calendar with the exception of E, F, S, T, and U.
If I could have a second.
I'll second. This is Peggy.
Thank you, Dr. Albright. If I could have a vote, please.
Just one moment, I'm catching up.
No worries.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Yes.
Peggy Mora Aragon,
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
and Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes. So our first item for consideration and action is going to be item E, which is consideration for approval of statement of equipment to be taken out of service. This is for technology for April 1st to the 30th, 2023. This is a discussion action item. We have Mr. Mark Turnbull here. He's our Executive Director of Accounting. We have you as our speaker, but I will go ahead and open it up to Board Member Miller Aragon for her questions.
So I know that you did try to answer my questions, and I don't know if they were just mine, about the equipment taken out of service. So I know we included reasons. So back when I would just ask so many questions about why, and there are no reasons listed on either this item or the next one. So I just didn't understand why all of a sudden that got taken away and the reasons are not listed as to why that equipment is taken out of service, who made that decision, why that decision was made. If somebody could answer that for me, that would be great.
So, yeah, so I will say the bulk of the computers that are taken out of service were taken out of service because they were old and obsolete. And I think if you're saying the reasons for the ones that have a value other than 0.
No, you were just, well, it's like, we don't know what the reasons are. Now, I did get we did get an answer to that question saying that most of them were really old, et cetera, et cetera. But even when we would take other equipment out of service, and it was a lot of computers, and it would still say they are obsolete, they're old, they're broken, they're et cetera. And that's not the case anymore. So is that just going to be the way forward, that we're not going to list reasons for why they were taken out of service?
So
And that if that decision was made, it was made. So
May I say something?
I offer some conjecture here, and maybe this will trigger something. So the people who have been managing that department it was run by Ron Sandoval. And Mr. Sandoval has since retired.
Right.
And I don't know that we have been able to replace him. So it may have been that whoever is trying to pick up the work simply did not complete that task. I don't recall anybody having a discussion at any time to not include that information. So my feeling is it was probably an oversight or a lack of manpower in the department, as we are, again, when you don't have the leader there to check it through, it makes things hard. So we'll look at that before we come back next month.
okay. And then the other question was, there are a lot of Chromebooks on here, I didn't even count how many there were, that it says their location was Inventory Control Osuna Warehouse. And I am just making an assumption. I think you use the TEP Web IT, right, to track where everything is, correct?
Yes. So what you're seeing with respect to the increased volume, I think I've mentioned it before. Our initial priority during the pandemic was to distribute the device that the students needed. And what we are doing now with our new, we hired additional staff. We kind of focused them on collecting the ones that are old and scanning them, inventorying them, making sure that they're truly obsolete, packaging them up into big pallets, and kind of moving them through the salvaging process. So you can expect to see, for every single purchase that we've made between, 3 to 7 years later, that amount will show up later. And we're really catching up because that process involves collecting the devices, bringing them to the warehouse. When they're brought to that warehouse, they're scanned in. And so that's where you get the different location change. And it doesn't mean that that's where they were before, but TipWeb keeps track of where they were. And that's the last location.
So is this gonna, because I know before there are schools that says, Cibola, Tony Hillerman, it says where they, got taken out. So is this what's going to happen from now on, or not necessarily that it's all going to go to the warehouse? Because I see most of these were older, obviously older computers that went in service in, 2017, 2018. I think that's when most of them, if I recall, were.
So we're in the middle, in the past, all the salvage processes were triggered from the school site. And so the equipment would be salvaged directly from the school site. And for now, for the devices that technology is collecting because they're obsolete, we collect them and we scan them into our own inventory to say, hey, look, they're over here. And then we salvage them from there. So you will, in the future, you'll still see some that are salvaged directly from the schools. So schools, for example, suppose there's a device that's been, destroyed at the school site. It was dropped, stepped on, rolled over by a car or something like that. And they have the ability to just call salvage right there. And it does not have to, it doesn't necessarily need to go be sent over to technology. We do offer that as a service, but schools still can do that. So in the future, the bulk of things should be coming from a warehouse in technology. The bulk of technology items should land there, but schools still can send their own. Schools can still send their own if it comes from schools, and technology will send them that way as well. if it comes
Okay.
from us.
So you do know what schools these came from, though?
Yes, we can identify it. It isn't tip web. It's a one by one research process for each asset. We could go back and look, but there's no report at a tip web that's going to give us that information. So it would take a person going to each record and trying to identify and going back and identifying where it came from.
There's a chain of custody. Every time you scan it into a new location, it records the scan. So we can see where it currently is, but going backwards means like you have to check each item and then see where it was before. And then some of these Chromebooks, a lot of the Chromebooks are assigned to individuals, so it's not really a school. So if it was assigned to a kid directly. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Probably not. I mean, I just think, and I am not a finance person, that you need to know, and that would go to probably Ms. Apodaca, that it's important to know where things were, right? Like, I personally think that's important. I think any business needs to know where things are, where they started, where they ended. And I think that's important. I don't know, maybe it's not. If it's not, just tell me. It's not important. Who cares? It's all from the warehouse, even though we know all of this stuff didn't originate from there, that it did originate out of school. So a child still, if it's checked out to a child, it still goes to that school, though. It's not the child's.
But
Right?
what if a child is in transition, board member?
Well,
What if
most
they
of
got
them-
it in 5th grade and now they're in 6th grade, started in one school and go to another school? It wouldn't be assigned to a school, it'd be assigned to a student.
What I can tell you
Yeah.
is that we do
It
have a
does.
record of
Okay.
where each item is assigned at all
I would
times.
assume so.
And also, we can track where it was one by one. So it's not that there is what I think, Mark.
Correct.
Sorry.
I'm
it's a long
sorry.
day. But what I believe he was saying is that there is a report that has a field that says location, but there's not a report that has a field that says location before that or location before that. We can print that out, but it's not a report that we have, because usually people want to know like where their things are like currently, and they're not like going backwards. It's not like there's like a standard report for that. I actually believe we can go back and find out at a certain point in time, like where was everything at another point in time, like we go backwards. But some of these might have been, anyway, there's not a simple way to have a report that says the location before the current location.
So because I don't know tip web, IT, whatever it's called. That obviously doesn't help with knowing where it was previously. Is that true? Doesn't really help with that at all.
If we had a business reason to look and find where everything was the step before the current step, we can get that done.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say inventory systems are made to find out where the asset is currently. They're not made to find where the asset was previously. It's a tracking where the current it's a real-time system. It tracks where the asset currently is, because that's the important, where it has been. Again, as Dr. Roman said, there could be a reason you would look, but not for all the assets, because these are basically they're obsolete.
So can I ask a follow-up question to that, just so I could understand clearly? So let's say it's October and I'll use West Mesa. You know, they have all these Chromebooks that have been issued to the students. If we pull a current inventory, it'll say these Chromebooks are for West Mesa, right? They're not going to say the location of the Osuna warehouse. No, I'm saying that's not going to say that. Because that would say currently that's where they're
It'll
at.
say, it'll have the student ID.
Okay,
And then we would need to cross-reference the student ID with the current enrolled
Mhm.
location of the student.
okay, and
with
then,
employees.
let's say now still use West Mesa. May, whenever all the students, all the seniors graduate, they have their Chromebook. All those Chromebooks get turned back into West Mesa? And then those go back into West Mesa's inventory?
Correct.
And if we pull that inventory list, it'll say for West Mesa, not Osuna Warehouse.
Correct.
Okay, and is that, that's standard across all the schools? I would take it.
Correct.
Okay. I don't know if that was part of your question, but I just went to a different.
No, that was.
Sorry.
Yeah, when the computer or the asset is at technology waiting to be delivered, there's a delivery room. When it goes, like if it's sitting as a hot swap, like a spare, like the school has, maybe 10 or 20 to exchange out just in case one of them breaks live. They have like a holding room at the school. And then when it gets assigned out to a person, it gets scanned to the person's ID. So there's a chain and you can find out where anything is at any particular point.
Okay.
So
And then-
in your opinion, is Tip Web IT worth it? Is it good? Does it do what it's supposed to do? Do we need to make our inventory control better? Because we need to know this is taxpayers' money being spent on things, like we need to be able to answer to them.
Yes, TipWeb is a good system. It's the system we've got. It's in place. Where we ran into problems was the ability to use it early on in the pandemic when we couldn't touch anything or touch anybody. So we had to do a lot of catching up after the initial handout because we couldn't, we weren't allowed to touch. And so we had really struggled. The last, I'd say, year and a half, the Capital Fiscal Services has undertaken a major project in terms of finding devices that had gone missing, and they have recovered over, I think, $10 million in devices. So there's still a lot that are missing, but it's not as frightening as the first number that was thrown at me a while back. So TipWeb is the key. It's just making sure it gets used by the people in the schools.
Because you started using that, it's been like, I think before I even got on the board, right? Like, I think it was before 2015. So it's been used for a while, I'm
It's
assuming.
been used for a while, and I don't think it had been used quite this way. I think it initially
Right.
might have been in the libraries, and I know you use something similar, Ms. Altabelli. You can nod at me, just nod.
There's
Something similar. Thank you. Yes, because they won't hear you on the mics and you'll have to run up. So yeah, I think it's a machine, a software that it does exactly what it's supposed to do as long as we use it.
And if you want to engage in a further conversation about different cool ways of tracking IT assets, there's a number of ways that do things. There's other software systems that help that are more automatic. Like, for example, if I know that somebody logged into a system and I know their IP address and their geographical location, I might be able to use that to identify where all my assets are. So TipWeb does not have that capability, but it's something that, anyway, we're always looking at new ways to improve things.
Okay. Just when I'm looking at location, it just seems here just a little misleading. So, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions related to item E?
I'll move for approval of statement of equipment to be taken out of service for April 1st through 30th, 2023.
I second. This is Josefina.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion, Dr. Albright, may I have a roll call?
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Yes.
Peggy Mota Aragon,
No.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes. So our next item for consideration and action is item F, consideration for approval of statement of equipment to be taken out of service for April. That says the exact same thing.
It's this one, the first one was technology, and this one is just equipment. So that was
Got it,
what
got
was
it, got it.
confusing. Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
and I will turn it back over to Board Member Miller Aragon for her questions.
I mean, same thing, that the reasons weren't listed again. And then when it came to, I know you were ordering a whole lot of Promethean boards, and there are schools that say they don't have what they need. And so I didn't quite get an answer if the smart boards that were taken out of service were replaced with new ones. If you don't know the answer and you can get the answer, that's fine.
What I do know is that we are ordering sufficient Promethean boards with the stimulus funds that every classroom will have one. So the ones that are being taken out of service here they're really, really old.
Yeah.
And they might have been projectors and not boards. But we do have a project in place to ensure that every classroom gets one.
Okay,
And there will be a lot more salvaged in the next few years. So we're going to go in, we're putting in the boards, the ones that are there, the schools are going to be salvaging in the next few years.
okay. And I'm assuming that the reasons weren't listed because of what Superintendent Elder said, that we probably just don't have somebody there to list the reasons that they were taken out.
I don't believe it's a decision to do it. I don't know what happened. We'll have to look into it, but I don't recall anyone ever saying, let's stop doing this. And I have a feeling that maybe the transition and authorities, it just didn't get done. So we'll follow up.
And honestly, I think I was under the impression that I recall putting reasons where the value was something other than zero. And so those, I believe, have reasons, but the ones where.
If you could just look and see
We
if
can-
that is just
for
the
sure.
case, and if that's I want to make sure that does just continue. So if the value is more than zero, that is on there, and it could have just been written that way or just done that way.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions related to item F? No, if I could have a motion, please.
I'll move for approval of statement of equipment to be taken out of service for April 1st, 30th, 2023.
I second. This is Josefina.
Thank you. Dr. Albright, if I could have a roll call, please.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes.
Peggy Muller Aragon,
No.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes. So our next item for consideration is item S, which is consideration for approval of district purchase or expenditure that equal or exceeds $250,000. This is for advanced placement English language arts instructional materials. This is a discussion action item. We have Executive Director Ms. Glesner here from procurement, and I will open it up to Board Member Miller Aragon for her questions.
Thank you. So I know I looked through everything and you all said you got input from, teachers that were teaching the subjects, and that you also got input from the community. So my question on this one, and it'll be the same for the other two, but for the English, the AP English, how much input did you gather from community?
Board Member Mueller Aragon, we got more input on health than the other subjects. I hope that teachers worked with community members in ways that we don't always know about when they're making their recommendations. I think it's safe to say that they presumably do. Teachers are talking to their parents. So hopefully we have that baseline amount of community input regardless of people filling out forms.
Okay, so we don't have any idea how many people gave their input?
Community input is an area for potential improvement that we are continually trying to come up with new ways.
Because I know that they have to, if they want to look at the book, they have to come to Central, they have to come here. So that's obviously an impediment for a lot of people.
And we had online options, which we could do again, and we also had low input there. So I would say that we are very always interested in ideas for how we could get more community input.
Okay, because I think that's important. And I don't know if it's up to maybe the publishers being able to put the digital copy of the book, and maybe there's reasons that they can't. I don't know what it is, but that would be something that would make it easier, at least for those that have access to a computer, just to be able to look at the book that way.
We can absolutely ask for sample lessons. We could, any ideas. I think it's always good practice to ask publishers for what we want. Because if we don't ask, they won't know what we need.
Right. And so I think that's something to just ask. I mean, maybe they can put a digital copy of the book so that people can. And, publishers are up against each other. So, hey, that might be an impetus to get them to do that. So I think that would be important. So then I was, I did, look at these books, and they talked about, I looked at some of the authors, and some of the authors, I thought, my own opinion, that I wouldn't know why they would get chosen, that I didn't think they had, were really good literature, in my personal opinion. But what I found interesting was that they had a pie graph, and it had diverse range of voices. So there was this pie graph. And so I'm assuming, and you can tell me if this is what they were referring to, is the authors that are part of that, ELA AP said 50% white, 25% Black, 11% Asian. Can you tell me what that pie graph refers to on their website? Is it about the authors that?
Board Member Mueller-Aragon, that would be a possible thing. Are you talking about the Bedford Freeman Worth titles?
Mhm.
To answer that question, I would really want to look at the specific pie chart, because our lives are full of pie charts about instructional materials and authors, and I would very much not want to answer about a different pie chart. Is there a link or a place I could look?
No,
I
I
can give
just
you the
looked on
information
I just looked on to see, I went and looked on to, for, it was high school for AP. And so this pie graph came up, and I just was like, I don't know if that's what it is. And if you could find out if that's what it is, I don't know how that makes for good literature, or has anything to do with good literature, that you are getting so many authors that are Middle Eastern or Jewish or LGBTQ, male, female. I don't know what that has to do with choosing good literature. And if that is the case, I would like to know if that's what that pie chart is referring to, because it wasn't very detailed. It wasn't very detailed about what they were talking about, if they were talking about the authors. That was my assumption.
Right. And Board Member Mueller-Aragon, I am extremely reluctant to talk about the specific pie chart, just because I don't want to be inaccurate. I'm a librarian. I don't want to do that. I would love to research it and tell you exactly what they meant to say by it, for sure. But when we are looking at high quality instructional materials, it is true that one of the things that we are looking for is a wide range of authors and experiences. That's one of the things that the New Mexico PED is asking us to look at when we look at high quality instructional materials.
Right.
And it's very much like the attitude that we have in the libraries, where we don't want to take voices away. We want to add voices. We want to say, here's more stories. I mean, and by stories, I also mean nonfiction too, of course, but here are more pieces of information. Here are more perspectives. Let's just give the kids more information and more stories, because then they can make up their own minds, which is the most beautiful result of education. So that is a part of high quality instructional materials. But as to the specific pie chart, our colleagues and friends in the publishing land, they do love a chart. So I would want to look at the specific one before saying anything, just because I wouldn't want to give you inaccurate information.
I just want to make sure that we're choosing good literature, and that's what it's about, teaching how, kids good literature, how to be good writers, not about, and I looked further into, this ELA, AP ELA, and I mean, some of the things that were in there, and I'm not an English teacher, so hey, I could be wrong. I can't speak that much about it. I can only tell you from an elementary perspective, but some of the things that were in there just were like, I just questioned what they had to do with English, to be honest with you. And when we're talking about the course that some of our textbooks and our curriculum are like taking, most people that I talk to are not in agreement with the curriculum and the way a lot of textbooks are. And that is, on Santa Fe, and it is on the publishers giving what they think. But parents they just want to have like a bigger say. And what they're finding is a lot of their values and beliefs and moral teachings at home, they just want them to be respected and not undermined. And because they believe differently than some of this stuff that I read, doesn't make those parents intolerant or hateful, but they don't want their kids to be, for the schools, for government to contradict what they're teaching, their family values and their morals or religious beliefs. They just don't want that to contradict what they're teaching. And what I saw in this textbook did that often in lots of the chapters. And I think that's a serious deficiency in my opinion. And I just think in the end, it's going to pit, parents against schools, which is not what any of us want. We want to be a real partnership. And I don't see that happening with, the world language, with the health, or with this one. And I would just tell parents that are out there, like you said, they didn't come look at the book. So some of that is, it's on them. But we also need to make it easier for them. But I say, if you don't like what's going on or what your kids are being taught in the classroom, speak louder. You're a louder voice than my one voice. I can vote no, that I don't agree with this because of what parents tell me. But it still can get shoved down, down your throats if you're not speaking up. And kids are the easiest to get to through education. So I say, parents, you need to stand up for your parental rights. That's what I say you should do. And you need to make the trip down here. But this is going to be are we having these books for 6 years?
Madam Chair,
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else, Board Member Millardo? Nope.
okay,
Board Member Dominguez.
then I want to thank you as a former English teacher and forever an English teacher for pursuing the goal of including many voices. And on that note, I move to, may we go ahead and move to motion to accept S&T?
So before
I'm
we do that,
happy-
I just want to see if there's any other further questions or discussion related to item S. Go ahead, Board Member Jackson.
Thank you. The only suggestion that I wanted to have to offer is I was I was surprised to see this because I actually did not know that the AP language in the world were coming up. So a suggestion that I might offer for more community involvement in the future is to let the board members know and ask us to help you get it out to the community. Some of us have social media platforms. It's really easy for us to let the public know that this is coming. We can alert the public, we can alert the community so that they can come down and review and kind of give their feedback. Because if I missed it, I apologize, but I did not see anything, especially on the AP language or the world language. I will say that I did appreciate your review that you gave in the document as to what the process was. I think you guys have really gone a long way in improving the process, and I am so appreciative of that. But I would just ask you to let us help you as well. We do have platforms that we can kind of help engage the community. And so I think help us help you. So that's it.
Thank you. Any other questions related to item S?
I just want to make just sort of like a comment. I think it's more of like a point of order because I understand that, we had this on the agenda and I didn't see these questions being posed except tonight, which I believe that as board members, we made agreement that when we got these, we would ask our questions ahead of time so that our staff could come prepared. And so I think it's unfair to sort of fire at questions tonight when they could have been asked before. And I just want to state that because I think that's on us. We have to hold that as a piece of integrity ourselves around the structural process here, that, you know, the agendas are coming to us early, and we also agreed to no surprises. And so no surprises for our staff. I think we need to be fair on that. So if there were questions about what was here, they should have been asked. And I just want to state that because I think it's really important. And I know I'll just stop at that. So I think Board Member Dominguez wanted to make a motion, so I'll just wait for her to make her motion and I'll second that.
And so I move to approve the district purchase or expenditure that equals or exceeds $250,000 for the Advanced Placement English Language Arts instructional materials.
I'll second.
Thank you. Before I ask for a roll call, I just want to add a slight little comment on there too, please. And granted, we are doing our best of getting questions out in a timely manner, but at the same time, I think that's the beauty of our board, that we all have differing opinions, different backgrounds, and the ability to be able to say our voice. Like, at no time do I ever want anyone to feel like they can't speak up and share their thoughts, their feelings, and because overall, that's why we're here. We will not necessarily always agree, and that's okay, but we should always be able to feel like we have our voice heard. Granted, we're going to do our best to follow a process and a system to be able to streamline everything and be more effective and efficient. But I do appreciate everybody's diverse opinions and knowing that we're here to speak on what's best for our constituents, and we'll continue to do that. So having said that, we do have a motion and a second. So Dr. Albright, if I could have a roll call.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Yes.
Peggy Mula Aragon.
No.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
and Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes. So our next item for consideration is item T, consideration for approval of district purchase or expenditure that equals or exceeds $250,000. This is for world language instructional materials in Spanish and French. This is a discussion action item. Board Member Mira-Aragon, any additional questions outside of what was stated on item S?
No, and I just want to say, I think I appreciate what you said, Chair Tapia Romero. It was me who didn't get the questions in, and I apologize if I put you guys on the spot. My mother was in the hospital. She can't get left alone for a single second. So my sincere apologies, because I'm very good about getting them in on time. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ever put you on the spot.
Board Member Mueller Aragon, I am a librarian. You can ask me a question whenever you want.
Thanks. My mom's just very ill, and so I still am sorry. So it's basically the same, the same kind of question. This is different. It's like, I am assuming you didn't have a lot of community input, so we need to figure out how to make that better. And then just some of the things they said on here, when I was reading about it, was just, that Spanish belonged, that language only belonged to people of that community. I mean, if you kind of go into their website and just read more about what was going on there, is you just need to read a little bit more. I think world languages belong to everybody. My son-in-law is a Spanish speaker, speaks better than almost anybody that I know, and he's Scottish, from Scotland. So it doesn't just belong to the people of that community. I think it belongs to any child who chooses to learn Spanish or chooses to learn French. I think that should be the case, and that's how we should treat it. It doesn't just belong to one group. I think that's something that we need to look at. And that's one of the things that I had trouble with, just kind of reading more into this publisher. that we can only learn Spanish and be a true Spanish speaker if we're open-minded and we're tolerant, and that's the only way we can understand the Spanish-speaking cultures. I mean, things like that. I think that's just hurtful to people. So, and that's all that I have to say about that.
Thank you. Any other questions associated item T? If not, may I have a motion, please?
I'll move for approval of item T, consideration for approval of district purchase or expenditure that equals or exceeds $250,000. World language instructional material, Spanish and French. And I move for approval and thank the librarians.
I'll second. This is Danielle.
Thank you. Dr. Albright, may I have a roll call?
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Yes.
Peggy Muller Aragon.
No.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
and Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes. So our next item for consideration is item U, which is consideration for approval of district purchase or expenditure that equals or exceeds $250,000. This is for health instructional materials. And Board Member Mil-Aragon, I'll turn it back over to you.
So this one you got more input. So what kind of input? I would just assume you did, because I know when they were changing the health standards, there was a whole lot of input on health standards, social studies standards. So why do you think that you got more input for this one as compared to the other two?
Board Member Aragon, I actually think that it might be one of the areas that we've identified for potential future improvement, which is that there are existing like advisory and community groups. And that is something that we've identified for like K through 8, ELA, ELD, SLA coming up, is maybe we need to give the community much more notice and also work through established like groups of people that we know to publicize things. And we combined review opportunities, although then health still got the most, but maybe that is telling us just as much as you can, consolidate, make it easy for parents. So some of it could have just been the logistics. We still did not get, for a district of however many thousand students that we have and however many parents, I think we got, and I brought the spreadsheet and did not count them in advance. I think it was 15.
Okay.
Which is
that's
like
better than 0.
15 times as many as we normally get, but it is still not where we want that metric to be. Oh,
Right.
16, I misspoke.
See, hey, that's even better. So then, I mean, I looked at, I think they had like certain states had like these standards templates. So they figured out what their standard was and then where they can find it, I think in the textbook. So is that something that you're going to create, or have you created one? Is that something that you will do like other states have done?
I'll take that one, thanks. So Madam Chair and Member Muller-Aragon, for the health education one, we can do that. One of the nice things is, and Yolanda Montoya Cordova may remember this, the Centers for Disease Control actually developed a tool for reviewing health education materials. It's called the HECAT, the Health Education Tool. And through that tool, which was utilized as APS looked at the health education textbooks, that's part of it. You make that alignment. So we can go back and look at that. There have been other states, other districts and other states that have adopted the same materials, and they've done the same thing with the HECAT. So we could utilize the information from that tool to do that alignment for this. But I did want to make a statement that for health education and being a lifelong health educator, you don't use the textbook a lot. So the textbook is really very much supplementary materials, and like the sciences, the deep sciences, it changes frequently. Let's look at the pandemic. You know, the information we were giving 2 years ago about a pandemic is different than the information we give out now. The information changes too quickly. The nice thing about this textbook is it does have some online resources that can be updated as things update in the health world. And so that was, I think, why this was kind of an attractive material going forward. But the textbook as a health educator, the only time I ever used it was when I had a sub. So, you know, it's not really something that health educators rely on a lot. And so, but it's about time. It's been way longer than 6 years before health education has been in the adoption, because it kept getting from the state level, getting put back on the burner, on the funding for textbooks, because of the need for science adoptions. It's in that same, and literacy, it's in that same adoption cycle for areas that do need to be updated every 6 years.
Yeah. And it was interesting when I was looking at those different standards templates that different states had created. What you just said was true. It would be like, okay, we have this standard gender roles, or let's see, risk of sex activity, whatever it was. And then it would just have like a page number where they could link it to that textbook. So what you're saying is basically they use it for, this one page or something to link to their standards. And so it's probably the case that people still don't use the textbook as much. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have one, but it doesn't have to be answered tonight. But it just came into my head, and I'm just wondering how we are aligning, or how the decision around your choice aligns with goal number 4, to increase the percentage of students who demonstrate the skills, mindsets, and habits most aligned to life success, perseverance, self-regulation, self-efficacy, social awareness. And again, you don't have to answer that tonight.
I'll take a shot at it tonight if you'd like, since both of those are sort of in my wheelhouse right now. There is information in the materials that are being put in front of you around SEL. And that's really the big alignment in terms of health education and goal 4. And that's the SEL piece of it. And so this does have some information in there, although we are not going to rely solely on this textbook as we roll out SEL district wide. And so it is one tool in the SEL toolkit, and it does give health educators, which is part of their standards. So it's the one subject area where you will see in the standards some alignment to social and emotional learning, and where we don't necessarily see that in the other standards. But these materials will give health educators another tool in their toolkit. We're planning to give them a lot more tools, and not just health educators, but these materials are aligned in that way to goal 4.
Thank you.
Thank you. Without any questions, there we go. Board Member Peterson.
Just one thing. I am having a hard time finding the detailed description of these materials. So what grade level are these materials for?
Board Member Peterson, 6 through 12.
Okay. And just a general comment. I think standards are floors, not ceilings. And when it comes to health education, having taught health education known as sex ed with 5th graders, it's real clear that they are going to come with questions, and either we give them factual information and answer their questions, or we turn them loose to the playground and the internet, because chances are if they're asking us, they're not going to go home and ask their parents, even though we might say that's a good conversation for your parent. It's in way too many instances, it will not happen. And so it really falls on us to be honest, straightforward, and factual. Age appropriate, grade appropriate, absolutely. But one would be shocked what questions 5th graders come up with. And I think it's absolutely essential that across our curriculum that we reflect our community. And our community is incredibly diverse. And that doesn't mean being disrespectful of any family's beliefs, religion, ethics, but it does mean that we have kids sitting next to each other who have a whole broad array of different perspectives. And as a district, we need to respect that and reflect that. And so I really appreciate the work that you've done on these issues and materials. And so with that, I will move for adoption, if that's in order, of item, are we on T?
You.
On U. Okay. consideration and approval of district purchase or expenditure that equals or exceeds $250,000 for health instructional materials.
I'll second.
Oh, go ahead. Thank you. So we have a motion by Board Member Peterson, second by Board Member Dominguez. And Dr. Albright, may I have a roll call, please?
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes.
Peggy Mola Aragon.
No.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Yes.
Barbara Peterson.
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes.
Courtney Jackson.
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes. So our next item for discussion is an update on the District Series 2023 General Obligation Bond Sale. This is a discussion only item, and we have Mr. Turnbull here from accounting to give us an overview. Come join the party. Well, we have a crew.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I believe we've had a very good sale. We have representatives from RBC, your financial advisor, Stifel, our district's underwriter, and Madril to answer your questions and also give a high-level overview of the sale and how it went. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kaylee. That's
okay. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Kaylee Weimerskirch with RBC Capital Markets. We are your municipal advisor. As mentioned, that we're going to just go briefly over the district's recent bond sale of the 2023 A and 2023 bonds. So in your packets, you should have a presentation, a pricing book summary. Just a brief overview, the district issued one series of bonds, 2023A. It was for $70 million. These were new money bonds, so it can go to projects, capital projects for the district. We received $5.4 million in premium. The bonds came in at a true interest cost of just 3.4% for total interest to be just about $19.5 million. The bonds do have an optional redemption date of August 1st of 2030. And the bonds have already closed. They closed back on May 17th, and funds are available already for the district for spending. The second bond issuance that the district issued were refunding bonds, the series 2023 B bonds. These bonds were a total par amount of $42,885,000 and received $3.5 million in premium. The savings of these bonds produced $1.8 million in present value savings, or 4.15%. Again, these bonds have also closed. I will pass it off over to the underwriter of these bonds, Bob Casillas, to talk about the pricing and the marketing of these bonds.
Thank you very much, board member, president, Madam President, fellow board members, excuse me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. As Kaylee mentioned, it was a very successful bond pricing on April 26th, working very closely with the district, Ms. Apodaca, Mr. Turnbull, folks at RBC, Art and his crew at Madril, and the rest of the financing team. On our part, underwriting, a lot of pre-marketing went into the issue the week before, leading the days up to the April 26th pricing. Obviously, the district's rating is very high, AA, Standard & Poor's. It's a very good name in the marketplace. So your bonds are very well received. We were able to distribute the bonds to a wide group of investors. I think it was over 25 different institutional investors were able to sell bonds to New Mexico retail investors, money managers, bank trust departments, a very diverse group of buyers. There are over $300 million of orders for your bonds, about 112 million you ended up issuing between the Series A and the Series B. So you were oversubscribed, allowed us to work closely with RBC and their desk to lower the yields. Only the 23 maturity didn't have orders. We were able to take those bonds into inventory at our risk, which we always do as the underwriter. But overall is a very successful bond pricing execution by the district. You're very well led, obviously, with Ms. Apodaca, Mr. Turnbull, the folks at RBC and the folks at Modrel, and we appreciated the opportunity to underwrite your bonds. So I could go on and on, but you don't want to hear me talk about it, but I'll pause and see if, I don't know if Art has anything to say or if there are any questions. We're happy to address those as well.
Madam President or Chair and members of the board, the only thing I would say is that you may recall when you approved the notice of sale, you gave the authority to the administration to do what has been described here and to stay within the parameters that you set. And so I just want to affirm that every one of the parameters, which was don't exceed the interest rate, don't exceed the number of years, don't exceed the commissions, all of those parameters were met. And so we're here to say very nicely, all went well, everything's in place, and we have nothing untoward to say, only good news. These guys are super, all of them. So if you have questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you. I will go to open it up for any further discussion or question on this matter.
So just to point out, the refunding, Madam Chair, had a savings of 1.8 million. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then the only other question, if you could just explain this to me a little bit better, is on your municipal bond fund flows, the flow change and the 4-week moving average. So we see that, like, what drives the moving average? Like, what is that driven by? So I think it's on page 19 of your.
Very good question. So as you read and continue to hear on the news, the financial markets continue to be very volatile. So going back in time to April 26, that was certainly the case then. Recall the Fed has been, and certainly then was in the mode of raising interest rates. Inflation numbers that week prior had come in higher than the market anticipated. At that time, the inflows, there's investors specifically in tax-exempt bonds, and on a weekly basis, they track the number of dollars, millions and billions sometimes dollars, either going into money market or into the inflows for the Treasury investments or going out. And so I think preceding the sale, there had been 11 consecutive outflows of money, and the chart that RBC put together tracks that going back to, over the course of time. So investors have options besides municipal bonds to invest in, stocks, real estate, gold, whatever the case might be. So they were, because of that volatility, pulling money out, spending it elsewhere. So I think to your question, it tracks that ins and outs of that particular market.
Okay, thank you so much for making it simple so I could understand.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you to your team for being here to present. So our next item for discussion is item B, which is an update on the fiscal year 2024 budget. This is a discussion only item. We have Ms. Rosalinda Montoya, our Executive Director of Budget and Strategic Planning, here to present. I will turn it over to you, Ms. Montoya.
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members, Superintendent Elder. As mentioned, I am here to present an update to our budgeting process. In this presentation, we have the ERS team here virtually to give an overview of our student-based initiative. We'll be giving an FY23 update, our FY24 timeline on what's on our radar, and our FY25 budget. We'll be going over a few Edgenomics graphs showing our employee to student comparison and how we are looking at enrollment and staffing. A 3-year projection of revenue expenditures and what that may look like in the next few years, our potential areas of savings, and an ESSER update, primarily the American Rescue Plan Act, or what as we refer to ARPA funds, which is the third allocation of the elementary and secondary school emergency release funds, or ESSER funds. And with that, I will turn it over to Renette to begin our discussion on student-based budgeting.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me see next, a couple of slides. One more. Okay, next one, sorry. So today's objectives is to build an understanding of the ERS partnership, also to preview some questions answered in phase 1. Next. In alignment with the board and goals and guardrails and the strategic plan, we are working with ERS. And on this slide, you can see the specific goals, guardrails. And I am going to hand it over to ERS, if they're there, to Jess O'Connor.
Good evening, everyone. Madam Chair, we appreciate being here. My name is Kyle Conley, and I am the manager of the project that is working with the Albuquerque Public Schools. And I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes to reorient you. I think you've already heard a bit about this project and what all it entails, but important to make sure that we're communicating all along and that you are up to date with all of our progress as we proceed. So again, I'm going to be introducing my colleague Jess O'Connor in just a second. And you will notice that, like many of our colleagues, we spent many years in the classroom, principalships, and I also sit on my town's school board. So I'm eager to share this update with you, as I know that you're eager to keep the agenda moving forward. As I stated, we come from ERS, which stands for Education Resource Strategies, and we work with primarily large urban school systems to support strategic use and align structures and policies with the ultimate goal of improving student outcomes. Everything we're doing is specifically around resource use and focused intentionally on how we can be supporting our students. So if we would go to the next slide, please. There's on this slide here, you're going to see that that we are currently in the beginning of this project. We started in May, I believe was our kickoff time. So we are here giving you an update on what is really just the early phases of our data analysis and the work that we're doing to look at the different options for different funding models in Albuquerque Public Schools. So if we go to the next slide, there's this that I shared with you a little bit about ERS. You're welcome to take a look back at that whenever you have a minute. And if we can go to one more slide forward, I would just share a little bit more about ERS as well, just make sure that you understand the quality of work that we're providing after almost 20 years of supporting our school districts. We've worked with almost all the major urban centers across most of the states. And what we've learned from that gives us insight into how resources look different in many different contexts and how each context is unique. So we have worked hard to specifically design and implement some student-centered funding models in about half of these districts, which is what we're looking at doing here as well, if it makes sense within the context of Albuquerque, and if that's the suggestion that everyone moves forward with. Again, it gives us our experience gives us a deep functional knowledge that allows us to share what we observe in other districts and help shape decisions in a district's unique context. So I'd love to just pass it off to Jess O'Connor, who's leading our team, and she can share a little bit more detail about what Renette previewed and a little bit more about the work that we have already started.
Great. Thanks, Kyle. And thanks, board members, for having us tonight. If you'll go to the next slide, I'll share a little bit more detail of what Kyle previewed in terms of the work that's happening in this phase 1, which is our current phase of work, which is really designed to be around a diagnostic state assessment. And so we'll be working alongside many stakeholder groups in APS to really start to define the vision for the funding system, to assess the system conditions for funding redesign, and to identify opportunities to shift resources in service of your priorities and needs. So this work kicked off in May, as Kyle mentioned. We've been doing some data collection and have begun to process some of that data, though we don't have any findings in place yet. But we also planned and launched a kickoff visit for the teams. And during that kickoff, we met with several of the stakeholder groups in working sessions, focus groups, interviews, and I'll share a little more on the next slide about who the key stakeholder groups are. Our objective in that kickoff was really to gather input on current strengths and challenges of the funding system in Albuquerque, so that we can better refine the sorts of questions that we seek to answer through this diagnostic phase, and begin to clarify, some of the biggest enabling conditions that are going to be important in the Albuquerque context. So you'll see here we're organizing around 2 share outs, one in early August and the other in early September. We'll be sharing out some of those diagnostic findings and engaging different groups in meaning making about what they see in the data and what that suggests about where Albuquerque should go forward, with the hope that by late September, we've helped to facilitate this learning process that enables key stakeholders to articulate what are the core priorities of the system, and what does that mean for how the district should move forward on its funding redesign aspiration. So if you'll go to the next slide, I'll share a little bit more about who we're thinking about with stakeholders. And, I'll first say from our experience doing this work in many other systems, it has taught us nothing if not that funding redesign initiatives like this, in order to be impactful, really do need to be centered around the community's vision and hopes for what this work can accomplish, and that those closest to the challenges need to be at the center of the input. And so we've been working with our APS leadership team, Renette and Rosalinda and Superintendent Elder, to identify who the core stakeholders for this group really need to be, starting in this phase 1 diagnostic phase. So you'll see on the left here, one core group that we've already begun engaging with is what we're calling our working group. This is a group of cross-functional members across central office departments, including finance, human resources, academics, as well as school leaders and school zone associates across different zones and levels. We see this as our core audience for sharing and reviewing our preliminary diagnostic findings. They will help us sort of lift some of the priorities for change and identify some of those critical success factors. We do have at the back of the presentation, if you all are interested, exactly who's on that working group, in case you're interested. The other group that will be critical in sort of supporting this work is obviously the cabinet and leadership team, who have sort of started this work by clarifying their vision for what this resource model needs to accomplish, really prioritizing equity and transparency. And we see the recommendations coming from the working group as being a core input into the way that the cabinet and leadership engages in some of the ultimate decision-making around how the system should move forward and what priorities are most important. At the same time, we've begun, certainly not fully fleshed out yet, but have begun to identify both the venues and the ways to be engaging broader members. So starting with you all tonight, getting to give a little bit more preview of the work itself, but are hoping to bring back some of the findings as we're able to over the next couple months, so that you all as well can help provide input on both the priorities and some of the key messages. We've held some focus groups with school leaders during the kickoff time, which was amazing, really getting to dig into some of the challenges that schools and school leaders are facing and some of the strengths that they voiced about the system. We've met with Ellen Bernstein to share an overview of this work and to get initial input from union perspective, and are currently working to identify what the right venues and moments for continued input and sharing out with students and families. We know coming into this work, we heard that there was community excitement and engagement around the idea of funding redesign, and specifically thinking about what a move to a student-centered funding model could look like. So we're excited by that, but want to make sure that we're engaging folks along the way as that. And these groups will also be critical sort of voices in the design phase as we look ahead to what maybe this phase 2 work could look like. If you go to the next slide, we wanted to sort of connect how this funding system really aligns to your theory of action for change, and sort of sets us up to think about what sorts of analytic questions and diagnostic questions we want to answer in this phase. So the diagnostic is intended to shed light on some of the system level changes that enable Albuquerque to realize its vision for change with a funding model redesign. And that starts with the visioning work that you all have already done in your strategic plan as the foundation. We know the district has identified funding redesign as one of the core enabling conditions to increase resource equity and to align resources to your stated priorities. And that's such a foundational piece of this design work. So in the diagnostic, we'll seek to answer questions such as, what is the district's capacity to differentiate resources across the district? What opportunities exist to prioritize investments for student needs that really allow us to understand this question about how much is as part of the core questions that we seek to answer. At the same time, we know, as well as I think you all know, that funding model changes alone will not change the conditions for how resources are used and ultimately will not impact student outcomes alone. So while we sometimes say the funding system designs the how much, just as important is understanding how those resources need to be used, sort of our how well. And so this includes how flexible resources are and the systems and structures that enable school leaders and campus and district staff to make the sorts of shifts in their resources in order to create ultimately better student outcomes by creating and enabling different student experiences. So in this diagnostic, we'll also seek to understand the conditions for influencing those structures and systems, and understanding what needs to be true about how resources can be organized in Albuquerque to realize your vision for students and ultimately the board goals that you all have set out. Last slide here, if you go to the next one, this just sets out the 2 phases of our diagnostic share outs. So I mentioned we're going to be organizing 2 sessions, one scheduled for early August and the other to be scheduled about mid-September. We've organized them in sort of 2 big topical questions. The first is what I was just sharing in the previous slide, sort of our how much question. How can Albuquerque differentiate resources? How is it currently doing that? What are some of the challenges? What's the capacity to differentiate and reallocate to prioritize spending on need? And that second session really focused on what the funding flexibilities and structures need to look like so that once those resources are in place and differentiated to the extent possible, that they enable the sorts of shifts in resources that you all aspire to. So thinking about, what is the vision for what that looks like? What flexibilities must exist, and how does allocation of resources need to look differently to enable that? So this is our quick preview into where we are in this phase. As I mentioned, we aspire to come back to be able to share some of the actual findings with you once we've done some of the initial analysis. But I'll pause here for any questions about how we've designed the work in phase 1, any questions that we're testing, or just other comments or wonderings.
Board members, do you have any questions?
I have a question. So this is board member Montoya Cordova. Thank you for being here tonight and for assisting our state. This is great. I just have a question on the diagnostic side. When you're looking at the challenges, is the challenges also sort of weighing where the difficulty comes in from the barrier from like maybe down from the state and the way that money moves from the Fed state down? Because I think we need to really outline where those challenges and barriers might also kind of impede our ability to be flexible, correct?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. And absolutely, I think much of the question around capacity to differentiate resources is about understanding the constraints that you all have in the system, both because of state level funding levels, state policies, other constraints that sort of create barriers in some contexts, or at least constrain the way that flexibility plays out. And so, yes, I think that is part of the work that we're trying to do, is to understand what those conditions look like currently, and potentially set you all up to engage in conversations about what might need to look different in the future.
Yeah, because it seems like a struggle. I know New Mexico is kind of this weird state because we run on 12-month budgets with the legislature, which I think is just insanity, but that's just what we do. And so I know that there's several constraints in terms of just the administrative functions of how quickly money moves through the pipeline. And by the time it gets down to us, you know, what's that constraint in terms of the time that's actually hitting our books to the time that we actually have to spend it. So I think it would be really helpful to know some of those, especially as a board member. Those would be the kinds of things that we would be able to take back at a legislative level or at a state level, so that we could also push back, or we could also advocate on specific administrative changes that might need to take place to help us be more flexible. That's the number one concern that I hear from staffing, is that by the time the money hits, it's kind of, it just gets really wonky in terms of the time and the amount of time they have to spend it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Board Member Peterson.
I'm curious, from looking at the other districts that you've been involved with, and it's definitely an impressive list. I'm curious about what process you've used or what results you see with them for getting really authentic feedback. Just, you know, it's one of those things when entities come in to look at a system, it's that balance between using your expertise and experience that you come with, but also not having preconceived conclusions already drawn about what you're going to see, or how you interpret what you see. So I'm just sort of curious, in your experience in other districts, what you've done to sort of work through with people to have a really honest appraisal and understanding of that district.
And thank you for that question as well. I think we see the value of having some of that experience in other systems really as a way to help ask questions of the data that we see, and engender that sort of discussion. We sometimes, you know, think about that, the information we have to help benchmark or to help sort of pressure test where there might be opportunities to look a little bit deeper in one district's context. But absolutely, I think one of the things we've learned over the years is how unique every district is, and how communities are asking for different things from their district. And those are important aspects to understand how to move forward. So while we may be able to say, this is what we've seen another system do, or have you thought about this? You know, we recognize that ultimately the decisions that you all need to make must be grounded in the context that you're operating in. So we normally bring those in conversation to some of these share outs just to provide context, but really let the folks in the room in those working group sessions drive the sort of meaning behind the data.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing more as we move on.
Thank you. Go ahead, Board Member Larcon.
And kind of not quite going with what Member Peterson was talking about, but when it comes to, I know you said you work with over 50 major districts across the country. So when you're looking at the student-based budget, how has that positively impacted in these districts student outcomes? I mean, what have you seen, like a significant improvement in student outcomes?
I think that's the $1 million question that systems ask themselves. So I don't have a great answer. There has not been a lot of well done research on SBB as a sole mechanism for change. What I will say is I think that acknowledgement that moving dollars and creating a system that allocates dollars on needs alone will not change outcomes. I think we feel pretty confident about that. Where we've seen systems improve outcomes, and we have, anecdotal data and systems we've worked with. Denver, for example, is a system that we've spent a lot of time supporting over the years that has seen pretty significant improvements and, declines over their history as well. But I think what we have learned is that so much of the impact that students ultimately see is in how those systems allow resources to change as a result of that. It's that how well piece of that theory of action that we shared. So not probably a super satisfying answer, but I think that drives a lot of our belief around what else needs to be true in a system in order for a funding model shift to really result in meaningful change at the school level.
So I think I might just, I'm sorry, I would just quickly add, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I really think, this is an example of a removing of a barrier to create the conditions for that success and for their students, and creating space for school leaders to have, the autonomy to make decisions about how they're using their funding, or, as an example. But what I'm really thinking of this in terms, and what Jess is saying as well, is this is one component of an overall goal of outcome improvement that I think it's really important to name. Is not, that's not, one is not going to have the impact without the other.
And I know it's not just one thing that will help improve student outcomes, but it'd be, if somebody out there is doing a dissertation, maybe they should study what you have done, the districts that you've worked in, and see what they've seen. I think that would be, helpful. Just when I'm looking at your diagnostic and where, you're grounded in the vision, and then you redesign and, align the needs to the strategies. And then you see at the bottom that you're saying it'll create better student experiences and student outcomes, and APS will improve. So that's your hope, but not necessarily. You can't just prove that that's happened, but that's just what you believe and hope does happen. Correct?
Yeah, I think we can point to systems that have seen student improvement, and we notice that there are certain aspects of their funding system that do align to those principles of effective funding design. But the other direction, I think, is something that is harder to prove. And yes, we would love if someone could also do that dissertation.
And then the last thing I have, when you're deciding what the different roles are on the page that has stakeholders and roles, and you look at the, working group and the cabinet, and then you look at APS and staff and the collective bargaining groups and students and families. And I just think student and families should have a bigger, kind of a bigger say, but it's pretty equal to collective bargaining groups. So how do you come up with deciding what kind of roles each of these groups, stakeholders, has?
I think we often look to the system, and, Renette, if you want to jump in here as well, I think starts with understanding your decision-making frameworks as they exist now. So how do you think about who's your input provider, who is ultimately your recommender? So we've shared from past experience that one of the things we find successful is having a cross-functional working group that is a sort of voice of recommendation up to a leadership, but that multiple groups, including students, families, collective bargaining units, all have a sizable input role. So that's how we've thought about it, but we lean heavily on sort of what the individual districts have done in the past. We know that you've recently gone through a strategic planning engagement process, and so we're also leaning on what that process looked like for you all as well to inform that. Renette, would you add anything about how we've thought about this to date?
board member, this is just a draft. So we're still working out some of these groups. So definitely, we definitely want your input and we can make changes because these are just, kind of draft from, especially the student and families, because we haven't had a chance to put that together yet. We're working on that. So your input is greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions or discussion on this? This part, I should say? No? Okay, Ms. Montoya, I'll let you continue.
Okay, can we put up the slides again? Next. And next. Okay, so back to our updates. Currently we are working in kind of multiple years. FY23, we're closing out. FY24, we just are hoping to be approved by PD, and then we're looking to FY24. So I'll start with our FY23 and what we're doing. Of course, we're in the middle of our fiscal year-end processes, and Mahela and her team are working on summer payroll, charter billing, payroll and billing accruals, any final cleanup needed to close out the year. And of course, this all leads to our final year-end billing. Once FY23 is closed, we will be able to give an update on actuals. And this happens the first week in August. So we will have made updates to our budget. Oh, the other thing that we've done is we've made updates to our budget website, which is visible to everyone. And we have our budget presentations on there and our approved budget documents posted. Renee Holmes, one of our senior analysts, is close to having our FY23 budget book ready to publish on the website. And once we do that, we'll send you the link so that you can know that that's available. And we are also reviewing our next, our budget board policy present on our August board presentation. Next is our FY24 budget timeline. We have posted our budgets into OBMS and hope to have PED's approval by this Friday, so that we can post the budgets and so that they're available July 1st. We continue to. Yeah, it's always down to the last.
It's always down to the wire, isn't it?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, Mahela just showed me an email from PED asking for some more updates. So we're continually working on that budget all the way to the end of the month. So we're still in that process. And so we are now on our FY24 budget timeline. Correct. I lost track of where I was. Okay, so our budget, we as you know, and we're working with the ERS project management team, and this as they continue to assess our data to see how we can move to a student-based budgeting system. And we meet with them weekly. And we continue to attend Edunomics webinars to stay current with all that is happening in districts nationwide. And Renette has now received her certification in education finance from Georgetown University. So congratulations, Renette. And being part of this group has really helped me to have a place to discuss issues that are facing all of us in education finance, and knowing that we are all facing similar things. Next, as we move on to FY25 budget planning, these are some of the items that we have on our radar. The ESSER funds will no longer be available, and we've mentioned, the ESSER cliff. So we've really put a lot of time and effort into that. And then we have the Phase 5 Fine Arts expansion, which will cost about 1.8 million. And the way that's on our radar is we will be probably lobbying for legislation so that this would be covered through the SCG instead of us having to find other funds to be able to do that. The Panorama software renewal, which is about $742,000 plus an FTE costing about $118,000. Our next request renewal, which is the IBRA software, which costs about $14,470. The Edgenuity software, which is virtual learning of $1.8 million. The computer devices that we've had one-to-one technology initiatives, which costs about $10.5 million. We'll have to see how we can continue that or of a variation of that. And then, of course, the ERS student-based budgeting, the phase 3 costs. And then we are going through the ERP implementation, which will cost about $20 million, but that is going to be, we plan to have capital funds for that. The panic button continued services, that is, we hope that that will also be on capital, but it has to be on all these have to be on our radar anyhow, just in case any parts of it will affect the operational budget. Next.
Can we pause real quick? Because I think we're going to shift gears with these next few slides. I just want to ask a question specific to the computer devices, the one-to-one. Has there been any additional conversation, or I don't know if I don't know if you'll know, or if someone else on staff, are we going to continue it one-to-one now that we have completely transitioned out of COVID? Are we seeing those devices still needed? Is it specific schools? Where are we at on that? Is that appropriate question at this time?
I think that is something that we're looking into, and I don't know if Richard would like to chime in on this, but yeah, we're definitely know that there'll probably have to be a variation of that, but I don't know what discussions.
Madam Chair, while Dr. Bowman's getting ready, I wrote down a similar question, so just want to add on a little bit. Because when we first talked about, or when we last talked about one-to-one, I asked a question around the theory of change for how the use of technology relates to student learning. And the answer was that's to come in the strategic plan. So I'm curious if you could just sort of, an amendment to Chair Tapia Romero's question is how this fits into the strategic plan and student outcomes.
Thank you for those questions, Board Members Gonzalez and Tapia Romero. With respect to this particular budget item, it's important to note that prior to, I don't know, this thing is sounding weird. Prior to the pandemic, there were already, our technology was in a fairly difficult state. The schools had been choosing for years between classroom technology, displays, Promethean boards, etc., teacher technology devices, classroom devices and laptops, and student devices. So around, I want to say 2005 or so, there was a big investment into technology, and then that amount of investment had kind of tailed off, and schools and students we didn't have up-to-date technology. So the pandemic was a huge challenge, but it also brought a significant amount of additional funding so that we've been able to catch up with that kind of legacy technological debt, and keeping up with it in the future will require us to have to make some decisions about whether we want to maintain what we have or not. The teachers have now, one of the things that we're doing now, which is not just one-to-one for students, is ensuring that each of our staff have a device that is less than 5 years old, because slow devices that don't work when you want them to create frustration and stress and anxiety, which reduces effectiveness. So with respect to the funding, we had a big investment. It kind of was tailing off. I'm sure you've also, those of you who've been around for a while, had heard the complaints about having really old devices and things not quite working. But the stimulus was a bit of a blessing in disguise, which helped us catch up. But we're going to, a few years from now, we're going to have to decide whether we're going to maintain. With respect to the theory of action behind one-to-one and other technology in the classroom, I wouldn't say that we have a document listed there per se that providing a kid a computer is going to be the silver bullet that changes everything. But for our staff, ensuring that they are able to do their job with the minimum of frustration is kind of a key theory of action for updating the staff stuff. And then also ensuring that there is a classroom display that is working and suitable for them to display whatever curriculum that they are trying to impart to the students is also valuable. But I do think that that is going to be a future question as to, whether this community and with your leadership also would like us to educate students using computers so that they kind of are prepared for whatever, prepared for using that in the workplace and the world in the future, or whether we should kind of not do one-to-one for all of our grade levels and, maybe have some grade levels where it's, paper and pencil and whiteboards and stuff. So I don't know if that totally answers the question, other than saying like technology is a tool to do something else. It's not an end of itself. And what we're doing with respect to the devices is to provide the students and the teachers the tools they need to educate the kiddos. And if it turns out in the pandemic, it was critical to have the one-to-one across all grade levels. But if it turns out that, say, for earlier grades, earlier kids, that a one-to-one is not quite what's most useful, then we will also be considering a reduced ratio or some other mechanism. So I don't know.
So what I would like to add to that is, we had a discussion a few years ago, and I mentioned then that it was costing the district about $23 to $25 million a year to maintain the technology that we had, just to maintain, just kind of hang on. And that was on an extended rotation. We weren't doing every 3 years. We were holding some devices up to 5 years and 6 years. And we, as you see, oftentimes are discarded. We still find, devices from 20 years ago that people are hiding because they don't want to let them go. And we do have a choice we're going to have to make in terms of capital funding. Most of the money comes from the capital, and we know we have $7 billion in need on the buildings. So we may have to talk about, do we want to shift? The last time I talked to Dr. Bowman, he thought the cost on maintaining the devices as it stands and trying to keep it to one-to-one was about $41 million a year. And that's been about 6 months, so it may be more. One of the things I have been really pressing at the state level is the concept of they need to start thinking about this technology as something that needs to be funded, maybe not entirely by all the cities, okay? Because it is the new tool. And last week when I wasn't able to join you, I was in Chicago, and I was telling Board Member Mueller-Aragon that a big part of the discussion was about AI and the tools that are coming out that the students have access to. And, I really embrace it. I think if we don't jump into this and really get our heads into how we're going to use this and help the kids use it, then we're just creating a group of citizens who are not going to have the same access, who are not going to have the same tools. It shouldn't be the be-all end-all answer. So the theory of action, as I see it, is getting the tools in their hands and then getting the training in place so our teachers know how to use it effectively and ethically. And I think that's what's going to prepare kids better. They had some great visuals. They had some great ideas. And honestly, we're behind. And it's not APS, it's the nation. Education is always behind on this stuff. But I really embrace it. But I do think it's something that's going to be a future iteration of the board and the district are going to have to face is how are you going to invest? And if you want a one-to-one, you're going to pay. And the taxpayers may have to accept that. Do they want to do that? And we know tax rate increases are not fond. People aren't fond of them. But at some point, if we're going to have computers and Chromebooks, then we're not going to have pipes. You know, it's going to take that much longer because that's what we're choosing from. It's not, again, you're not choosing good and bad when you talk about capital. So and the other thing I'm saying, you know, we got that $675 million in broadband that came out of the federal government yesterday. You know, what I find so fascinating about that is it's not everywhere. Even in Albuquerque, it's not everywhere. And to me, I think we need to shift the paradigm of how we think about broadband. It needs to be considered a utility. You know, right now you've got private businesses out there running it and they only run it where they can make money. But it is a vital part of life now. And I think the technology is just, that's it. We have changed in education. We're going to have to accept it. We're going to have to move forward. And we're going to have this conversation that Dr. Bowman mentioned there. So just letting you know, that's where it stands in terms of capital and potential costs.
And honestly, I love that they're having the conversations about AI because that's something that has been on the forefront with ChatGPT and everything else that's starting to come out. And if we don't stay ahead on it, like it's literally like our teachers need to be fully aware of what it is, what the purpose is, and how it can be used in both methods, positive and negatively, because I'm sure it could get twisted in the classroom as well. What was intended to be a really awesome tool could cause our students not to have the proper learning that we're wanting them to have. So I'm glad there's that conversation taking place. When she said that, I was like, yay. You know, but I feel like I'm going to contradict myself here. I would hope that we would kind of steer away from the devices from kinder, first, second, you know, and not having that screen time, not having the tablets, because they need to be able to have that interaction. When we talk about social emotional development, like that is part of it, not being in front of a device and a tablet that is prohibiting them from fully getting that rich, thriving, full, like, I guess, development that they need for their particular age group. So my opinion would be that we would shift from the younger children from using those. Obviously, we know our high schoolers need them, you know, for projects and everything that they're focusing on, but not early childhood folks. Just my opinion.
Yeah.
Oh, it's more than just your opinion. I think
Totally.
I was
agree.
happy in the present, and I was going to say, I was happy in the presentation to hear a reference to differentiating between young children. And, you know, by third, fourth, fifth grade, the need increases, but for young children, it's not appropriate in an expenditure we probably do not need to have.
Fix the pipes.
And
Fix the
and
pipes.
the other theory, you know, our larger like theory of action here is to try to listen to the educators who are educating the students and try to understand what they need and then provide them that. So we absolutely have heard, and you know, if you go into elementary school classrooms, I guarantee you they're not staring at a computer all day. Maybe 30 minutes, an hour, maybe there's a block where they rotate in using stations or something like that, but it's absolutely not all the time. And I would just trust that our educators there are using being age appropriate for the students in front of them.
Just one follow-up. I think this is a case where we need to not let assessment drive how we teach. What we know is sound practice should be driving what assessments we use. And I know with the youngest children, lots of times the desire to have devices in every student's hand is because we are assessing them hugely in that, with that method. And so I think this is something that educators really need to step forward on and say, let's make sure that good practice is driving assessment, not vice versa, especially when it comes to the use of devices.
And then, Madam Chair, I just had one thing, is on the phase 5, the fine arts expansion, if I heard you correctly, correct me, I hope I didn't, is that going to really be dependent on what we get from Santa Fe? Or are we going to have to figure out how to find that $1.8 million and take it from somewhere else? Yikes.
Yes, so this is one of the things that we're thinking about, right? These are all just items that are kind of like I mentioned on our radar that we need to start looking at. And we're hoping that ideally it would be funded again, like this year they did give some funding towards that fine arts program. And we're hoping that that will happen again. If not, we would have to reassess at that time. So we'd have to see, we'd have to look at the budget as a whole and then just see. It doesn't mean that we would cut that or that, but we would have to find the funding for it.
Okay. I mean, because I just think that's very important to kids. Like, I just think it's essential to have that at every elementary school, no matter where it is. So that would be something. I know this year was it that they had received about $1 million. Is that with the fine arts? I think that's about what they got. So even if they got that next year, we still it wouldn't cover.
Yeah,
this
we'd still have to
expansion.
kind of supplement it a little bit, but hopefully we've been given, different types of grants and different funding has come our way. So we're hoping that even if it isn't in the SCG, maybe it would come through another grant or some other way. But yeah, it's definitely on our radar. We're just keeping all these costs because of course with the ESSER Cliff, all that money's going away and we can't rely on that anymore. And so whereas up to date, we say, oh, we didn't get enough money for that, let's use ESSER funds, or, it's been an easy go-to. And so that's going to be a little bit scary to just kind of reevaluate where we are once again with no additional funding.
Because we had said that we want those resources to be at all of our schools, that it's all done fairly. And so for all those, would be phase 5 schools, well, they're not getting what other schools are getting. So that's not fair. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's get us back on track.
I had another.
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Another question around items on the radar. So when we approved the budget, one of the things that Dr. Segura talked about was a program audit. And we talked a little bit about specific programs, foundations, Read 180, et cetera, but a broader look at what's working and what's not working, for the potential to reallocate resources away from what's not working toward what is. And so my question is, what's the time frame for that? And that may be a Dr. Segura question, or maybe for you all, but I'm just curious, like when might we have a sense of the potential for some reallocation?
I don't think she caught the question. She was talking to Dr. Gonzalez, so.
I think that would be a question for Dr. Segura.
Yeah. So my expectation is that would not happen. And this is a design year with the strategic plan. So you asked the question, you'll be more succinct, but I think this is the year where we begin to look at that and see what can we weed out. And this would be the year to try to figure out what we could get rid of, but she may answer it more precisely.
That's okay. So my question was, during the budget presentation and conversation, we talked a little bit about a program audit, for lack of a better word, but looking at the effectiveness and return on investment of some programs that we've historically invested in. And I mentioned foundations and Read 180 as a couple of examples, but there are a variety of other things that we're looking at for the potential to maybe reallocate resources away from what's not working to improve student outcomes towards what could potentially increase student outcomes. And so my question was, like, what's the time frame for when we might actually be able to reallocate resources?
So Madam Chair and Board Member Gonzalez, we have done an initial audit with the Curriculum and Instruction Department regarding what schools are using, how they're using certain programs within our district, and have cut out non-renewed certain programs that have maybe been site-based only. And so we're just funding for one or a group of sites versus, we're looking at how do we as a system engage in the needs of what the students need, and then the teachers through programming, for example, a reading intervention. We don't want these schools using one reading intervention and then these schools using another, because as a district, when we're, looking at that data, we can't compare. And that doesn't help inform our decisions. And so we have done that initial audit. I know that we were going to do some program evaluation when it comes to foundations and Read 180. And Joyce Gormley may have more to speak to that with the details of it, but I know that it is something that we're working on. And we did have the initial breakdown of what each of our district adopted high quality instructional materials are in every grade level and content area, so that it's clear to people what we're using, should be using, and then looking again at what are those additional pieces that we've, I guess they were referred to as passion projects possibly, that are not getting the outcomes that we're looking at. Other things, programs, when we look at, even community schools, AVID, those types of initiatives, we're really looking at how are we investing in these initiatives? How are they being implemented within each school? And we have begun, I can speak to AVID, we've begun to put some commitments in place, recommitments for schools and principals to commit to doing certain things to ensure program fidelity. Because we don't want to fund something if the leadership isn't there to support it. It won't be effective and it won't work. So we're looking at this stuff very carefully. AVID is one example. I can't speak to Read 180 and foundations.
Which is fine. It was really more a question of time frame. And so it sounds like big issues might not be on the radar necessarily for FY25 budget, but it's coming.
Yes. And again, like Renette and I speak pretty frequently about, how are we utilizing the resources that we have? How is it aligned to the budget and student outcomes when we look at our goals? There's a lot of really exciting work happening right now with how we're reorganizing and putting human capital in place to more keenly address each goal. So with that, there's going to be a lot more collaboration interdepartmentally to achieve, I think, what we have put in place. And so I think as we continue to move forward, it's not on our radar anymore. We're invested in it. We're doing it. It's going to take some time, but we are absolutely doing it. And we're not allowing programs, products to be implemented within the district without first the approval of the assistant soup for CNI. So we're putting some things in place so we can truly see what we're doing, how we're doing it, if it's funded. Is it sustainable funding? And is it related to student outcomes?
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Page 19.
Madam Chair, yes, we had teased you with some
Yes.
of these graphs prior and decided not to show it until this presentation. So we've brought it back with a few more slides. So this first slide is yes, it's up there. I didn't know if I needed to say next. We have the nationwide trend from the National Center of Education Statistics, which is a compilation of all the school districts showing what we are seeing nationwide. Enrollment on this particular overall, it's a 3% enrollment drop. And while the staff is staying somewhat flat or slightly increasing. And so on the next slide, now we are showing the Edgenomics graph from Lubbock school districts, which we see is quite similar to what you'll see on the next slide for APS, which, but this one is slightly more exaggerated. So I thought it kind of shows, the ups and downs a little better than ours, but It's similar in that the staffing has stayed relatively flat while the enrollment is down 14%. And this was shown in Biogenomics as a good example of where they have made some changes to staff, and it's starting to trend down from a higher growing employee ratio that we saw in FY21. So this is kind of like what you kind of want to see, is them starting to kind of go at least in the same direction. The next one is APS's trend. So we are, and these graphs, we're all using the same template because it was provided to us by Edunomics so that we can compare district to district, even if the district sizes vary greatly. So our staffing has also stayed relatively flat while our enrollment is down 18% over the last decade. And so in the next slide, I just want to describe kind of why we may be seeing some of this. And so the good thing is we saw that we're trending down, right? At least we're trending down as the same, following the same as the enrollment. But why is it not like closer? And one of, you know, some of the factors are that it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, right? A loss of a student does not equal to a loss of an FTE. And also, even with the student loss, it's not always in the same grade levels, so we still need to keep a teacher, right? We may lose just a few students everywhere, and student loss may be at different schools. And then also expanded programs, we require additional FTE, example, the fine arts expansion. And so we also have had an increase in special education students, and this sometimes requires, you know, a more 1-to-1 like educational assistant. And then APS may receive a grant that will require an FTE to run the program, like the MSAP grant, the Magnet Schools grants. And in the TOPS models, we also gave additional FTE because, you know, we just felt that it was needed for support. So those are some of the reasons why, even though we're starting to trend in the right direction, it's not really close. And actually nationwide, we've viewed a lot of the graphs from all of the districts, and a lot of the districts are actually going in polar opposites. You know, they're going this way. So we're doing pretty good. And at least we're starting to trend in the right direction. And so in the next slide, okay, we have our 3-year, can you guys hear? Oh, there it is. The 3-year projected revenue. So on this revenue, it's kind of complicated, right? Because it has all these items in the first column that affect the SEG. So what I did in order to do my projection, I just used the variables that I know about, right? So, this is the projection that is on historical trends, where I have made the adjustments. The basic education is that first line. And I projected that we would have a 3% decrease in our basic educated generated units, which has been the trend. So in that first line, if you look at the generated units for FY24, it's 89,000, then it goes down to 86 and 84. That's that 3% decrease. I'm also projecting an increase in our unit value, which has also been a trend. This year, we saw the unit value increase by 13%. For FY25, I projected a 7% increase, taking it from 6,241 to 6,678. And then the increase for FY26 was a little less at 4% increase unit value. And the reason I still feel that there's going to be increases is because the state still has a strong position due to our gas and oil to the state, but it'll eventually start to plateau. As we saw in prior years in FY15 through FY19, it stayed really flat. And I feel that FY26 is kind of going to be our peak and where we start to plateau. So next slide is 3-year projected expenditures. So in the expenditures, we know that in FY25, it's going to grow significantly. So I increased it by 7%. And the reason why I brought it up is to 7% is including some of the things that are going to have to come back onto operational from the ESSER funds. So I looked at all the items that I knew for sure were going to come on, took that dollar amount and then gave it a percentage and applied that percentage at 7%. And then in FY26, I figured it's probably going to settle down a little bit, and I only increased it by 3%, which is normal for inflationary costs. So then on the next slide, I put them together. What is the 3-year projected revenue minus expenditures? And so it really doesn't look pretty, but we know that we can make adjustments to improve the budget outcome. So just by looking at this is if we did absolutely nothing, this is what it would look like. And as some of you may recall, and back in FY20, we faced a $45 million deficit and we were able to pivot and come out okay. So I'm not alarmed by this. I mean, it gives us direction knowing that we have to make some changes, but it's not as bad as it could be, and as some of the other school districts that we've seen that have in the hundreds of million potential deficits. In the next slide is a list of some of the items that we've identified as potential savings, and of course, you know, we're going to be looking at a lot more than this, but this is just like some of the quick things that we've thought of to limit or restrict travel, to create technology efficiencies and streamline our processes, and looking at the long-term vacancies, and just really question, have these duties been absorbed by other FTEs, and are they no longer needed? Look at any redundancies, explore voluntary buyback of annual sick leave at a reduced rate. Some of the other districts are doing that, as we saw at Rio Ranchos is looking at that. And then of course, work with leadership to identify programs that should be funded and programs that may be possibly eliminated, as Dr. Segura spoke to. And in the enterprise fund, moving some of the expenditures out of operational into right now we kind of do most in operational, and the enterprise funds kind of supplement it, do it the opposite, have them use their funds and then we supplement it. And then continue the work with the right sizing committee. So the next slide.
You want to do questions right here while we go to the next topic, or?
No, yeah, let's pause right there only because we're going to switch gears again when we get to ESSER. Do we have any questions related to this or anything about the suggestions for potential savings? Any discussion on that? Board Member Jackson, I see your hand. Sorry, I don't know how long that's been up.
No, it just went up. I actually had a question. It was back on the 3-year projection for expenditures, and you mentioned the one right before that. Yeah, right there. You mentioned that you did the 7% because you're anticipating some expenditures are going to be moved back into operational. And I was just wondering if you could give us some idea as to what some of those expenditures might be that currently are being covered by ESSER, but that we are going to have to potentially absorb into operational. It doesn't have to be an exhaustive list. I'm just curious what some of those are.
That's a great question, and that's exactly some of the items that are on our radar. Some of those are some of the
Okay.
like the Edgenuity software that's currently paid out of ARPA. The Panorama is going to be paid out of ESSER. So some of those are already some of the items that we're looking at. It's mostly software, and we do have a few FTE that will be coming back, but amazingly, it's not too many. It's about $2 million worth of FTE.
Okay, so it's mainly software that has been purchased recently that potentially is going to come onto operational.
Correct.
And around a 7% expense. Like all of those are about 7%, so that's where you got that 7% from.
Yeah, well, 3% of it is the normal increase that we get every year, about a 3%. And so it's adding about 4% more from the ESSER.
Okay, good. Well, I'm happy to know that you guys are looking forward and not reacting. It seems like this is a proactive approach instead of a reactive. So I appreciate that you have looked into that. I'm done.
And go ahead, Board Member Peterson.
Just one comment, I guess, is I am not at all disturbed to see that there's a higher ratio of staff to students because and I'm not sure how that actually has played out in terms of class size and actual number of students in front of any given teacher at any given time. But when we talk about social emotional well-being, there's nothing more important than being able to really support that the relationship between educator and student. And so I'm not distressed about the number now. I am distressed about the potential going forward and what that'll mean for loss of staff.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to ESSER.
Thank you. So next is just a quick update on ESSER. Of course, these are our areas of focus. Unfinished learning for 79.6 million, social and emotional at 5.1 million, technology 20 million, facility projects 22.9 million, safe operations of schools 75.2 million, and other, which includes the indirect costs in charter schools, is 37.9 million. And then those little bullet points are just a few of the projects that fall in those buckets. And then the next slide. When you just take a first glance at this, it kind of seems like there may be two areas of concern, at least from my point of view. The first one is seeing that remaining budget of 50.5 million in unfinished learning and the 68.6 million in safe operations school. But I do want to let you know that all of these funds have been earmarked. And with each presentation that we come back and give these updates, you will start to see that the remaining balance will shrink and the expenses and encumbered columns will begin to increase. As they are earmarked, all of the funds are earmarked. It just is in the process of just the timing right now of when I pulled this data as of 6/22/23. POs haven't gone in place and that kind of thing, but everything is earmarked. I just wanted to point that out because it kind of, to me, it kind of stands out as being a possible red flag. So with that, I'll stand for questions on the ESSER funds.
So thank you, Ms. Montoya. So does anybody have any questions specific to the presentation or the last part of ESSER? Look at that. I'm going to run with that.
Thank you, and we'll keep updating you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Apodaca. Thank you, Ms. Montoya. So, where are we? Look at this. Okay. Our next Finance Committee meeting will be held on Wednesday, July 26th at 5:15 or immediately following the audit committee meeting at the John Milne Community Boardroom at the Allison Brewski Educational Complex at 6400 Uptown Boulevard Northeast, or virtually at aps.edu. So this meeting is now adjourned, but it'll be immediately followed with a special Board of Education meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. So welcome to the Board of Education Special Board Meeting. Dr. Albright, may I have a roll call, please?
Peggy Muller Aragon,
Here.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Here.
Barbara Peterson,
Here.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Here.
Josefina Dominguez,
Here.
Courtney Jackson,
Here.
and Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Here. So our first item for consideration and action is adoption of the June 28, 2023 Special Board of Education Meeting Agenda. May I have a motion, please?
And I'll move for it, for approval of the June 28th, 2023 Special Board of Education Meeting Agenda with the removal of 4A, 5, 6, 19, 20, and 21.
Okay, so do I have a second?
This is Crystal, second.
We have a roll call, please.
Peggy
Madam
Muller
President,
Aragon.
I have a point of order question. In the past, when we got committee reports from other committees, even when there was dissent within the committee vote, the entire all actions taken in the committee were presented as part of a consent calendar. And so there was only a single vote. And I mean, I certainly respect the dissent of any given board member, and I think that's important, but it's reflected in the committee report. I'm just curious about whether procedurally we have to vote on it separately again in the regular board meeting. I don't think that was past practice.
I'm going to ask our parliamentarian, Courtney, because I know she's been keeping up with this, but if we did approve this in the finance committee, because we've already taken the votes in the finance committee, the actions were already taken. All we're bringing forward now to the special is just the consent, and it's just going to be that calendar, and it will be noted in the finance committee that there was a no vote on some of these. So are we just voting that these were the items that were discussed and we're just taking the action there is the same?
Yeah, I agree with Board Member Peterson that it's reflected in the committee votes. And it doesn't need to be, it's like redundant.
Redundant, okay.
So items don't need to be pulled out separately.
And what we're doing on this too, is I'm looking at my agenda here. The first item was just adoption of the June 28, 23 Special Board of Education Meeting Agenda. The second item is going to be the consent calendar. So on the first is just the adoption of the June 28, 23 Special Board of Education Meeting Agenda. Do I have a motion just for approval of the agenda?
I move we accept the agenda for the special board meeting of June 28th.
I'll second. This is Josefina.
May I have a roll call on the agenda approval?
I have a question then. So then if we're approving the meeting agenda, it's with the consent already on there because that's part of the agenda. But since this is a new, I will just disagree with Member Jackson that this is where we'd have to pull off something off of consent. And since this is a brand new meeting, that all you require is one person to be able to remove something from consent.
But our next item for consideration and action is the consent calendar. And we could have a consideration for approval of items for the finance committee. That's where the consent, that's where that motion would come. The first motion is just simply for the agenda.
Madam Chair, I defer to Board Member Jackson, but my understanding is if you change anything in the agenda, it must be changed at the vote of the agenda, not within the body of the meeting.
Okay, so we can just go ahead and we have a motion on the floor with Board Member Mueller-Aragon taking the items off. Do we have a second on that? Because that was the first motion that was made.
I second.
Okay, so let's take a vote on that and we'll see where we stand. Let's take a vote.
Peggy Mota Aragon,
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Yeah.
Barbara Peterson,
No.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez,
No.
Courtney Jackson,
No, because I think it's redundant.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
No. All right. Okay. So our next item is a consideration for approval of the items approved by the Finance Committee on June 28, 2023. May I have a motion on that, please?
I just still don't, I don't understand how.
We don't? It says that we do.
I don't understand how I can't remove something from consent.
We just took a vote on it, board
Well,
member.
You don't need.
because
And
the way I understand it is you would remove it from consent to have a discussion about it, but we've already had the discussions committee. So all that this consent calendar is voting on is items that were approved in the finance committee meeting. And all of these items, even though there was a dissent, all of these items have already been approved in the finance committee. So that's what the consent calendar is mainly verifying, that this is what came forward from the committee. And so it doesn't have to be voted on again. Like, you don't want to remove it from the consent because you're not going to have another discussion on it.
So I think for verification, you're just saying because it passed in committee, that's why we would leave it the same as consent. If it didn't pass in committee, then we would have pulled it and voted on that. But I think just the confusion for board member Milatagon is we hadn't done that previously. So that's probably where the,
And I think we're just trying to get ourselves
yes.
in alignment with what actual parliamentary procedure is. So it is my understanding that we are correct, although board member Gonzalez is reminding me that what the vote was just now is that we voted that we don't have an agenda. So now we have to vote on an agenda that, because we voted against the agenda. So, geez.
So I will move for adoption of the June 28, 2023 Special Board of Education meeting agenda.
I'll second.
Can I have a roll call, please?
This is to leave the agenda as is.
Correct.
Thank you. Peggy Mota Aragon,
I don't even know what I'm voting for, so I can't even vote.
the vote is to leave the agenda unchanged with the consent.
Are you
agenda
just
items.
abstaining?
I will, because I know that's not
Okay.
true. I did talk to before, because I had a feeling this was going to happen. And I talked to a professional parliamentarian who said the finance committee is a totally different meeting than this meeting. And only one person can choose to take something off consent because it's a totally different meeting. It's not a continuation of the previous meeting. So I will. That's just what I was told.
Okay. So your vote is to abstain?
I suppose.
Okay.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes. So our next item for consideration and action is consideration for approval of the items approved by the Finance Committee on the June 28, 2023.
I'll move for consideration for approval of items approved by the Finance Committee on June 28th, 2023.
I'll second. This is Josefina.
May I have a vote, please? A roll call?
Peggy Mota Aragon,
I'm abstaining.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes. So the next Board of Education meeting will be held on Wednesday, July 19th, 2023 at 5 p.m. in the John Milne Community Boardroom of the Alice and Bruce King Educational Complex, 6400 Uptown Boulevard, or virtually at aps.edu. And the next special Board of Education meeting will be held on Wednesday, July 12th, 2023 at 3 p.m. Also in the same room and on the same website. So our next item is consideration for the Board of Education to convene an executive session as authorized by the Public Meetings Act, Section 10-15-1, H7, to discuss threatened litigation, personnel matters, and attorney-client privilege related to the following matters. One, former APS employee Cheryl Williams Stapleton, and two, Kelly Stout Sanchez et al. Versus Washington Middle School et al. D-202-CV-2021-06694. Do I have a motion for this agenda item, please?
I will move for consideration of approval for the Board of Education to convene an executive session as indicated on the agenda and described by Board President Montoya Cordova.
This is Crystal, second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Peggy Mota Aragon. Danielle Gonzalez.
Yes.
Barbara Peterson.
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes.
Courtney Jackson.
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes. Okay, so now we're gonna stop all of our. Okay, now's the time to take just a quick 5-minute while we get everything, everybody in the room that we need to get.